Okay, good day, everyone. My name is Peter Terschwell, Vice President in the Maritime and Trade Division of IHS Markit, and I lead the Journal of Commerce, including the TPM conference. In the first episode of the Supply Chains Reloaded series back on October 8th, we focused primarily on building resilience in the face of disruption. And obviously, we faced a lot of disruption this year. And we're going to touch on some of those same themes again today. But the overall focus for our dialogue on the webinar today is the role of globalization in supporting and extended supply chains. Now, in past years, you might say that it wouldn't have been really necessary to take a hard look at the role of globalization in international supply chains. But it sure seems to make a lot of sense today, given where we're at nearly a year into the global COVID pandemic. Sometimes it feels like it's coming at us from all directions at once. From geopolitical risk to the growing demands of e-commerce supply chains, given that e-commerce activity has virtually exploded this year, and again, to the question of risk mitigation at a time when we're experiencing repeated shocks to the supply chain, the pandemic being only the most recent. All of this is forcing us to re-examine basic assumptions about how supply chains are organized and executed. And that, in the broadest sense, is what we're going to focus on in our conversation today. And I think it's really critical that we use opportunities like this webinar today to talk about these issues, because things are changing, and they're changing quickly. And all of us, no matter what kind of organization we work for, whether a BCO, carrier, forwarder, terminal operator, trucker, literally everyone involved in international supply chains is being forced to adapt. And to do that successfully, we need information, and we need guidance, we need input, we need new ideas, new ways of thinking. That's what the time that we're in right now is challenging us to do. And that is what this session today is intended to provide. So in that regard, we're very fortunate to have with us today a number of leading figures in the industry who are with us to share their perspectives about this very unique environment that we're in currently. With us today is Kim Peterson, the Global Head of Sales and Marketing at Maersk, Paolo Montrone, the Senior Vice President and Global Head of Trade Management in the sea logistics business of Kuehne+Nagel, obviously the world's largest ocean freight forwarder, John Stanley, the Head of Inbound Logistics for the Very Group in the UK, Michael Greer, Senior Vice President of Operations at Durrell Home, a division of Durrell Industries, and finally, Stuart Whiting, joining us from Singapore, Senior Vice President of Logistics and Planning at Schneider Electric. So, gentlemen, thank you all for joining us today. Our agenda for the time that we have to spend together today is as follows. Overall, is it time to rethink globalized supply chains? What is the new normal for globalization? We're going to take a look at inventory, what to expect in regard to how we think about inventory and how that's changing given the forces coming to bear on supply chains today. We'll revisit the question of shocks and risks and resilience, and how do we look at that, given that the pandemic is essentially only the latest of several shocks to the system that seem to be the new normal. And then finally, taking stock of it all, how to ensure a resilient and agile supply chain in the environment that we're in. So that's essentially what we're going to do today, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation. I want to just start by asking Kim and Paolo, when we look at globalization, the concept of lengthy, extended, globally connected supply chains, and particularly when we look at that in terms of offshoring or outsourcing or nearshoring or insourcing, all the different buzzwords that are applied to questions around changing or altering strategy in regards to supply chain. How does the current environment impact your thinking on those issues? Kim, can we start with you?
Absolutely, Peter, and thank you for the welcome, and hello everybody on the call. I think it's fair to say that the current situation, or the new normal, as you say, Peter, is pressure testing both supply chain and globalization as a whole. And some of the main things themes that we are focusing on is observations like that this new normal is accelerating known items that we probably have already identified before within the customer's supply chain. That things have been pressure tested, smoked out, if you wish, that there is a number of activities that we need to dive further into. And one of them, for example, is digitizing our visibility and our analytics on the supply chain. We tested, Peter, with customers that 68% of the ones we asked, they will invest more in technology tomorrow than they did yesterday in the supply chain field. So that's just one example. Another one is that I think we see a lot of contingency planning happening out there now based on the recent learnings, but also on the learnings of the volcano, the learnings of the flooding in Thailand, whatever happened in Japan and so forth. And these contingency planning means that we move more into a proactive supply chain planning than a reactive one. And I think that's also a point I would like to highlight. And finally, before I hand over to Paolo, I think, and we will come back to that during the session today, is it's a pressure test of globalization in terms of how that impacts global trade. And I mean especially here that governments have an impact on closing borders or not, which is something that is also elements we need to bring into the overlying theme, which is building resilience into the supply chain.
Excellent, Kim. That's a great way of looking at it. And maybe, you know, when it comes to governments, we can later touch on an issue that I know that Maersk has been very vocal on, which is the whole continuing crisis around crew changes, because that really shows a lack of appreciation on the part of governments, not just for the issues that the maritime industry faces, but the fact that the maritime industry is responsible for carrying the vast percentage of global trade. And when you don't allow crew changes, you put global trade and you put safety in jeopardy. And so maybe that's a topic that we can get into a little bit more later on, because it's a continuing problem. Paolo, how do you guys over at Kuehne+Nagel think about globalization within the context of the current environment?
I think it's, thank you very much. I believe that maybe we start from where you left it off about global trade and the impact that crew changes have. I don't want to dwell, we're not a carrier, so I will not talk about crew changes, but very clearly, the world depends on trade, and containerized trade is a big part of this. It's not the only part, but it's a big part of it. It's fuel the global economy. It fuels a lot of emerging countries in terms of manufacturing, in terms of bringing economic standards to a much higher level. So I believe that that the trade, the whole, and I believe all the people here are good example of this is something that will continue, and I believe that we have a unique opportunity now to leverage the technology that we have that probably 10 or 20 or 30 years ago was by far not mature the way it is now. And I speak about technology overall, not necessarily only digital technology, but all technologies are available in order to really leverage any kind of challenges that we can face in trading globally. Today, the pandemic put a lot of stress on the system. This is not the only stress the system has endured. We had global financial crisis. We had various crises, maybe not to the extent of this. We had before the pandemic, we have trade wars. That also created certain uncertainty in how certain countries are trading with each other. All these have impact on supply chain. Supply chains will have to become more agile, and I believe that the new norm, when we talk to our customers, when we try to consult our customers, and also internally how we operate, is the new norm is to be very flexible, very agile. And you can do this through very strong collaborations with all your partners. And that I think it's probably the underlying theme of today, and hopefully also outside this web conference is how supply chain actors will collaborate closer, better, faster, and more efficiently together. Because if we do this, then of course, shocks, which today is the pandemic, tomorrow will be something else. I think about environmental disruption, what we're doing to the planet is having effects. We see that extreme weather problems are more frequent. These have a big impact on supply chains, and how we collaborate and how we can offset these issues will be key. And I believe that collaboration and good technology will bring us forward, and that's a lot of focus on this, people and technology.
Great, Paolo. Thank you very much. I think that you and Kim raised a number of important themes that really are very relevant in the environment that we're in right now. Collaboration, the relationship that exists between logistics providers and customers. How could that and will that change? Can it evolve towards a more collaborative environment versus more transactional? Is there going to be an evolution towards more value being created in the supply chain through collaboration and through technology? And what you seem to be saying, Paolo, is that when it comes to agility and flexibility, which, as you mentioned, are some of the big themes that you're really seeing in your interactions with customers right now. What you're not seeing and what you're not saying is any sort of major rethink about globalization as underpinning modern supply chains. It's just that the way in which supply chains play out is going to be potentially changing based on the themes that you mentioned. Is that accurate?
Yes, this is, of course, my view. I hope not to be proven wrong. I believe global trade will continue. There will be evolution in global trade. We've seen over the decades, even the century. Of course, the world changes, and with this, trade will change, but this connectivity will continue. Also, thanks to the technology that we have today and tomorrow, we are looking forward to the first carbon zero vessels, emission zero vessels. I believe I'm quite positive that there is, despite coming in a very stressful time, as we speak now, mostly from our homes or our home offices. I'm actually in the office today, but of course it's not cheap optimism. I believe we have quite a bright future in terms of trade, and there will be great opportunities for all the trade actors to excel into this, as long as the right choice. And I think that a good forum like this is to discuss what are the right choices and what are the right strategies.
Perfect. Thank you, Paolo. Stuart, I want to bring you into the dialogue. Thank you again for joining us. How do you guys view globalization? How do you view extended supply chains? Is there greater risk that you see in longer supply chains? Is there any rethinking going on within your organization about, given the experience of repeated shocks to the supply chain, the pandemic being only the most recent, but potentially the one with the greatest impact? How are you guys looking at it right now? Stuart, can you hear me? Did we lose you?
Yes, can you not hear me?
Oh, now I can hear you, yeah. Okay, I couldn't hear you just for a moment there, but now I can hear you.
Okay, hopefully nobody heard me swear there, I do apologise. Okay, first of all, Peter, thank you for the warm welcome. The management guru, Jim Collins. We're in a moment of ferocious instability, and really we're planning to instability.
Stuart, I think I'm losing you here. You're kind of coming out. Maybe what I'm going to do is, are you back, Stuart? You're cutting in. You're cutting in and out a little bit.
Okay. All right. So I'm not sure where I cut off, but I'll start again. So in the words of Jim Collins, we're seeing ferocious instability. We're very much seeing a ongoing planning and change in the manner in which we address not just our footprint, but our manner of looking after the supply chain, but critically the demand in our customer base. So we talked about digitization. I think that was touched on by Kim. And the predict and sense of what we're doing against what I would call supply is becoming critical. So we're looking at multiple sources, really looking at how we manage manufacturing across multiple platforms, not just our own, and outsourcing, but truly looking at what I would call a collaborative capability mix in meeting not just in the ever-changing demand we're seeing in the market. I hope that's making sense.
Yeah, no, I'm picking it up. I mean, I was sort of you were still dropping in and out a little bit, but what I'm hearing you say, Stuart, is that you're building quite a bit of resilience into your supply chain. It's almost as if the expectation is for continued disruption. The term ferocious instability that you mentioned really resonates, and that is not as if that's going to be the case for the next 6 months or the next 3 months, but actually could be the scenario going forward for any number of years.
Correct, and it's really about the adoption and standardization of systems and tools. Again, it's about digitization. So when we look at our SIOP processes, when we look at our sales order and execution, we really are. And, we're saying a business as usual variable between supply and demand of about 40%. And through predict and sense and information, really beginning to narrow it down so you're far more precise in the last 13, 14 weeks of order execution through the supply chain to satisfying demand. I hope that makes a bit more sense to you.
Yeah, certainly, because what you're doing is in order to be able to create certainty within your supply chain and predictability so as to be able to deliver as per customer demands, you're going to be driving towards a higher degree of digitization in your whole business process. Is that a fair way to characterize what you're saying?
Yes, it is. But I think, again, data's huge in this. It's not just what we're doing today, but it's really building the predict and sense capability for the future. So we're thinking a lot more further beyond just the customer, but we really are looking at regulatory environments. We're looking at what's happening in the environment. We're looking at other social or economic disorders that could affect our state of play. But you've always tried to build contingency in the back to fulfill, be it local, regional, or global. And then it's just a risk management game then as to what cards you play.
Yeah, understood. Obviously a very, very complex, increasingly complex environment that you guys are managing. Michael, coming to us from Montreal, welcome. Globalized supply chains from the point of view of Durrell. What are the big themes in terms of the way you guys are looking at the environment right now?
Good morning, Peter, and thank you for having me. Yeah, I think, the challenge continues to be focusing on the right balance between either offshoring, outsourcing, nearshoring, or bringing stuff that we're producing externally back into our own facilities. We run facilities, manufacturing facilities in the US and Canada. We have production and supply facilities across the globe. And I think our role and responsibility is always to continue to find the best possible value for our customer and for our product for our customer and for our stakeholders. And that kind of principle hasn't really changed. I think to your point, it's become more intensified, but I have the good fortune of leading both our IT and business intelligence organizations as well as supply chain and distribution. And I can tell you that the amount of focus that we have on looking at predictability and having a better understanding of what early trends are is going to mean a lot less reactionary on the supply side. So we're really leaning in 2021 into this kind of business intelligence format. And, the one piece that we haven't talked about, we talk a lot about process, we talk about product, what we haven't talked about, with the exception of touching on crews, is the human talent. And that's a huge, huge factor for us, is trying to get absolutely the best possible talent we can, be it in supply chain, sales, marketing, et cetera.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's, talent is a whole area unto itself, because what does it take to recruit and to retain the best talent? I think that's a subject that companies are giving an enormous amount of thought to, and including our organization at IHS Markit. We talk about this internally all the time, and part of one of the main foundations of that is inclusion and diversity. and a culture, a culture of respect, and so that people, because talent resides with anyone. Everyone has talent. The question is, what talent do you have? And so therefore, anybody and everybody can be precisely that person who is going to make a huge difference in your organization. But that person the organization has to draw out from them the potential that they have. And for big organizations, that requires a leadership in order to drive that down through the ranks and all the way through the recruiting process, all the way through the, everything. Is that a fair statement, Michael?
Absolutely, and that's that's the shift that we're trying to make, as well as to become a talent-focused organization. And the product gets to the customer through a supply chain process, but it's the people that can reach out and make a difference. And to your point, everyone has that talent. We've got to make sure that we're drawing out and recruiting and retaining the best possible we can.
Yeah, no, that's great, and I do notice that what you were saying, just in response to the sort of overall question of how you're thinking about globalization, globalized supply chains, is leaning in, as you say, to digital tools to drive and improve predictability throughout your supply chain. That is similar, I think, in some ways to what Stuart was saying. So I think that you guys are kind of on the same page in that. Did what Stuart was saying resonate with you in terms of you guys are thinking along similar lines?
Yeah, I think it's a common theme for forward-thinking organizations to try and be less reactive. We have the resources at Durrell to be able to do this. And that's I've been given the opportunity to lead us through this very challenging period. And I think if we're going to come out, whether it be 2021 or later, we'll come through this in a much, much better, more resilient and robust operation than we are today.
Okay, that's really great. John, I want to bring you into the picture from your perspective. Again, how has the experience of what's now going on to a year of when we were all thrust into a very different, very unpredictable environment that didn't turn out this year the way many people thought it would. How is it changing the thinking within your organization?
Yeah, for me, I think I'm still a believer in global supply chains, very much so. I think when it comes to us as a retailer, our sourcing choices are constrained. Whether that's iPhones from China, Nike trainers from Vietnam, furniture from Malaysia, where the brands go, we go. So, our choices are quite constrained in terms of sourcing in some ways. I think, in terms of physical supply chain, we know that evolves very, very slowly. I don't really foresee, the sourcing landscape changing drastically in the next, 3, 4, 5 years. It'll evolve, of course, as it has done for, forever. But yeah, I don't think it'll drastically change as much as some people might. Digital supply chain, on the other hand, digitization, that has come up several times in the conversation already. That is where the investment is needed. We need to get more horsepower behind that, both as organizations, as retailers, and in the logistics industry. Yeah, that is where the investment needs to be made.
Mm-hmm. And for you guys, when you make those investments and when you're planning those investments, what is it that you're trying to achieve? Like, where do you need to get to in that area versus where you are today, for example?
Yeah, simplistically, we're still on investment, same as every organization. I think for us, we look at investments across the whole company. So it isn't specific to operations or logistics. It is across the whole company. So, we always choose investments based on what will ultimately deliver value for the consumer, for the end consumer. So yeah, it's difficult.
Understood. And what is it when you say and when you sort of envision what the future is going to look like for you guys in terms of how technology is going to improve your ability to serve customers and all the business benefits that come with that, growing revenue and growing the company and so forth. What are the digital tools that you envision being a real focus for you guys going forward here?
Yeah, for us, what's crucial is the interconnected flow of data. So, if you take it from factory to port to vessel to port to warehouse, etc., some of those steps are linked at the moment, but not all of them. And for it to work properly, all of those steps have to be interconnected so there's a smooth flow of data. And sometimes that is not the case at the moment.
And do you anticipate that will be the case soon? Because we went back, we were putting the TPM program together, for example. We went back to the very first TPM, which was in 2001, and there on the agenda was a panel discussion on visibility, right? And here we are 20 years later, and a major company like yours is saying, the data from one end of the supply chain to the other isn't flowing smoothly the way it should be 20 years later. But I guess my question is, are we seeing a acceleration in digital development such that this might not be a problem in a couple of years? Like, do you anticipate this is going to get solved, or do you think that the whole international supply chain is just so fundamentally complex that it's not really solvable to your satisfaction? What do you anticipate in that regard?
I mean, I think the thing to say is the technology is there. It's not the fact that the technology isn't available. It's there. I think what's maybe held us back in the past is that different companies and organisations working to different agendas. There isn't necessarily a joint business plan. And you can take retailers, freight forwarders, carriers, all the way up the chain as far as you want to go. Ultimately, there has to be a joint business plan with shared outcomes where we can all get value. But yeah, the technology is there.
Yeah, Kim, how do you respond to that? Because what you guys are doing at Maersk is, it's a very interesting, certainly one of the more fascinating stories in the industry right now is where you guys are trying to build, where you are building an end-to-end integrated container system that in part is based on digitization and based on data and the ability to create previously unachieved levels of visibility, perhaps to customers. How do you view the conversation around digitization that you've heard from these three customer companies?
Well, I think, Peter, that it's clear that if you had this discussion, was it 20 years ago at TPM, then it's still not solved. So the fact is just what John said, that there is a number of actors into the supply chain. And our answer to that in Maersk is that we would like to integrate that more stronger. And of course, the digital play here is super essential part of it. So the more you can integrate that digital journey, if you wish, from end to end, then we can provide the data that the individual customers are looking for in an integrated way. Now, I brought a few examples of what that is actually, Peter. So if you take, for example, a big FMCG customer, they're just looking for SKU level visibility across their supply chain. So things that we have been asked for about years and years and years, and others are looking for certificates to be digital rather than the rubber stamped locally, or a automotive customer who wants to look at their tier 3 supplier, that where are they with their specific products, because they know just one item on an assembly will break down. So these visibility things can come in various shapes and forms depending on which customer you're looking at. But the most important thing is to integrate those information. And I would like to take that one step further. I think there is very basic integration of data, which is visibility and those kind of things end to end. But there's also a question of how can we integrate that or, if to use a buzzword, democratize that to the world. We heard both Stuart and Michael talking about that accessibility to information, which in my opinion should come through collaboration, through further democratizing. You know that we're working in Maersk and also with other carriers on the blockchain product, which is called TradeLens, which is to take a step in that direction, where we try to solve an industry problem, a global supply chain industry problem, of making that accessible to all. So one day we'll set that free.
Well, yeah, and this is this question of data and collaboration around data is a really hot topic right now in the industry. It came up at the Global Maritime Forum plenary, which occurred just within the last few days. Yet again, a need expressed to bring data together at an industry level to a level that has not been achieved now. But even then, you have just a week ago, Michael Lind, who's one of the sort of leading thinkers on data collaboration in the maritime industry, authored a paper that I tweeted a link to about a week ago, basically saying that the obstacles to data collaboration remain quite high still these days. Reluctance to share data, insecurity about sharing data, distrust of sharing data. And because of potential competitive implications around that, and I still think sometimes, Kim, that we're sort of in the infancy still in trying to tackle those issues at an industry level. Do you agree with that, or do you think we are making significant progress?
I think that the new normal, as we started talking about, is pressure testing that we are moving forward to. So I think that many customers that I speak to now see the need, or they emphasize the need for having a better talk between outbound logistic, inbound sourcing, between demand planning and forecasting, and just internally within the clients, the customers that we have on this call as well. There's big challenges just to share information in the right way, in the right systems, in the same system, having the same visibility. And then you can add all the actions beyond the individual customer, how to bring that in. I think the current situation has pressure tested the need for it and thereby accelerated that transformation, yes.
All right, well, very good. And I wanted to sort of shift the discussion a little bit over to the question of inventory. And Stuart, I think we may have you back. I saw on the internal chat that there you are in Singapore. You have a tropical storm with lightning, thunder, and torrential rain that tends to work wonders, not in a positive way on your Wi-Fi. But are you back with us now?
Well, hopefully you can hear me, Peter.
Yeah, I can hear you fine. So, kind of bridging back to where you were, what you were talking about before. How do you view inventory in this context? I mean, is there so much risk now in the supply chain that inventory takes on a different meaning than it did? And do you have to rethink the approach to inventory within your organization? Is that happening at all?
Yeah, indeed it does. And again, I think it just brings ever closer the need to understanding demand and having accuracy in demand. But it equally rethinks the way that you manufacture. It really makes you rethink about the reusability of products as well, and the commonality of platforms as you put multiple products out into the marketplace. And as I was sharing with you, if you were to say there's a deviation or plus or minus 40% on your business as usual model, then the trade-offs and the buffers of where you put inventory really means that your network design needs to become dynamic. So you've really got to understand where you are. You've got to understand where you can reposition inventory according to, regular demand, agile demand, campaign, project logistics, whatever you may be managing. And as a consequence, you've also got to think of inventory from the perspective of value. It's not the cost of inventory, but it's actually the value of that inventory in the bigger picture in the supply chain and in the eyes of our customer. So again, a lot of people will take a perspective of inventory based on cost or a cost to serve. They don't necessarily look at it in the eyes of the customer, where indeed a very small, inexpensive part could hold up a multi-million project that we've got with our customers. So we're starting to take a very different approach in terms of where we levers or the levers we tweak, where we buffer inventory, and that buffering zone, so we build the capacity within the supply chain, will alter and it will shift by season or by demand, is also changing with how we look at the classic model of building inventory, putting it to stock, putting it to shelf, and then being ready to distribute, to really having more faith in our demand forecasting and building what we call inventory in motion. So what was previously dead time of goods in transit really becomes live inventory. And against that live inventory, the connectivity that Kim was talking to, being able to provide real time, commit dates to when we could deliver based on where we are in that physical movement of product. So, sales in transit, movement, sort of inventory in motion is very much our new thoughts. It's about where do we take redundancy out, where inventory is that adds no value to the process. And so we really are streamlining, but at the same time, creating buffers where we require by better sensing, better prediction of what the market is demanding. So I hope that answers your question, Peter.
Yeah, Stuart, that's really, really interesting. But and I think that when you, instead of saying goods in transit, talking about inventory in motion, we certainly saw a lot of that dynamic play out this year when we went from lockdown to sort of V-shaped recovery of volumes, where many shippers were telling their carriers for the first time in a while, slow down. I don't need it right now. You saw containers piling up early in the year in May, April, May, and sort of port of LA, Long Beach, because customers were simply not ready to take delivery because stores were closed and consumer activity really had not restarted. And then it went from that, the pendulum swung in the other direction. And so this idea, and I think, Paolo, it gets to what you were saying regarding flexibility, because it's not simply that inventory needs to be speeded up, and in some cases it does need to be speeded up. Hence we're now seeing more fast trans-Pacific transits than we did, more fast trans-Pacific services. But it's not entirely like that. It might be in some situations, but in other situations, it might be that really the supply chain vendors, such as freight forwarders and carriers, need to accommodate different speeds of transit depending on the various supply chain strategies of customers. Is that fair, Paolo?
Absolutely, it's more than fair, and absolutely, it's a very good learning lessons that a lot of people have learned during the pandemic, especially the early stages. I think one of the key things that always the holy grail of supply chain is how you can accelerate and decelerate a stream, an inventory stream. Is it on a global scale or specifically on a regional scale? And the ability to do this pushing this button and pulling these levers, of course, can mean, I think, exactly what Stuart was referring to, having the inventory at the right place at the right time, where it really means something for the customer. What is that inventory has a lot of value, at the same time slowing down if it's needed, or it actually create additional cost, like we've seen in the United States when or also in Europe here when a lot of retailers were closed for business and containers were piling up. I think that we have some good stories where we were able, customers that we worked very, very closely for many years, we were able to successfully implement fast and flexible programs to actually accelerate and decelerate, or actually first decelerate and then greatly accelerate their inventory movements. At the same time, and I think it's fair to discuss areas of concern and areas of improvement. There are, of course, organizations that have not looked at this, have not tested this lever. I think that my people always say, don't always find a lever or a red button to push, or you need to test it the same way you test the fire extinguishers in your offices. You must make sure that your levers, your emergencies, your agility is tested in order to implement it when it comes. And people that did this, people that were prepared, came out better. Although it's a symmetrical challenge, because this pandemic has hit more or less every industry and more or less everyone. Some people actually made an opportunity out of it, as bad as it may sound, and I don't want to make it sound as a business opportunity, but they made an opportunity to make sure that the supply chains outperformed maybe a supply chain of a competitor. And how they did it, I go back to where we started. I think we all touched this, is of course agility, is collaboration and strong partnership with their providers, not necessarily just logistics provider, but all the actors in the supply chains, where people have tested these relationships and they have a good strategy how to properly execute, because all these things need to be executed. Recently, I was talking to a large organization. They said, we have we are very happy about our visibility, but the problem is we are very unhappy in how we execute on the visibility. We know when things are wrong, but we seem that we cannot execute to fix them, or at least not fast enough. So I think that this also touches on the talent. You need still people. You need exceptional management. You need people. You need creativity with the proper execution around the world where these things happen. And very often you need to be where the issues are. So I think that this is it's a learning lesson for a lot of organizations in the world, and I think that this will force a lot of people to relook at their plans, relook at how they manage their business, and reaching out to all their partners to create even stronger alliances. And maybe in the future, and this procurement to logistics partnership will shift a little bit more towards logistics partnership, because we believe that there's a lot of value that the partnership and strong cooperation can create in the supply chain, without, of course, losing sight on the procurement part. We all understand that part, but I think that it's we can create a lot of value and together, and this is clearly it's a joint effort.
Yeah, no, understood, Paolo. And this gets back to what we were talking earlier concerning partnerships, relationships, value versus a long history in this business of transactional, very superficial relationships and limited value being created. I know Maersk, Kim, you guys are really trying to break out of that in your strategy. If we were to just continue on this subject of inventory just for a moment, but then maybe even tie in the question of risk, because inventory and risk are fundamentally linked in how companies are organizing and thinking about supply chains. And Michael and John, I want to bring you guys into this. You both sell in part over e-commerce e-commerce channels. E-commerce has its own demand, places its own unique demands on supply chains. E-commerce is, as we know, growing even faster than it grew before as a result of the pandemic. How are you guys reacting to this? How does inventory take on a different meaning, if at all, for you under the circumstances that we're in right now, and where we may be headed, assuming that some of what we're seeing right now is in fact a new normal? John, you want to start off on that one?
Yeah, sure. So, I think for us, as you mentioned, we are a pure play online retailer. Thankfully, in these circumstances, demand is very strong, although the category mix is very disrupted. Simplistically, less fashion, more electrical and home items. That presents its own challenges, of course. What we're seeing is that the inbound flow, we're based here in the UK. Inbound volumes at the moment, this isn't just for us, this is the whole market, are plus 80% year on year. And as I mentioned before, look, the physical supply chain doesn't get any bigger. So, there's a lot of congestion, getting product through into the country at the moment. I think, what I expect to see, in the retail market for us at least, is orders are going to be placed earlier. We're going to see longer production lead times from factories, of course, as, the demands on them are, continue to increase. And we could see more local lockdowns and supply chain disruptions. So, I think, in the short term, at least, there'll probably be quite a defensive attitude to supply chain management. It's kind of building more safety stock and building more latency into the supply chain and more buffers.
And if you were to talk about just briefly on what Paolo was mentioning concerning collaboration and partnership, do you have any view of that? Are you thinking more? Are your view of your logistics partners evolving given the experience over these past several months?
Yeah, I think it's, that's when our partners really earn their money, in situations like this. It's, they're the ones who can help us navigate all the complexity. I think, what we've needed is we've been much more in the accelerate supply chain than the decelerate camp, for demand reasons, basically. So, we found that, the strength of that partnership is what has enabled us to do it ultimately. Without that support, it would be impossible. We simply couldn't do it by ourselves.
Mm-hmm. And Michael, from your point of view, I know we're tying together a number of themes here, but risk, inventory, e-commerce partnerships. How do you sort of bring that all together from the point of view of Dorel?
Well, we're the majority of our sales come out of the e-commerce segment. So similarly to what John's gone through, we've been in the accelerating mode rather than the decelerating mode, and we've heard many stories about the brick and mortar retailers absolutely slamming on the brakes. And that created a lot of congestion in the market. But I think, most companies are taking a close look at their safety stock parameters. And again, I alluded earlier that we're focusing on our forecasting logic and the insights that we're gaining from that, because the inventory is a large investment. And what we'd rather do is invest in the technology to be able to have a lower level of inventory or a more accurate level of inventory, to what Stuart was talking to, taking out that plus 40, minus 40 swing. If we get that down to a 10 or 20% swing and know very specifically, either by product category or specific product, what that's going to do, it's going to help tremendously in terms of the investments that we make in inventory. But, there'll always be disruptions, whether it's climate change, disruptions in the network through congestion, geopolitical. Obviously, we look and reach out to our partners in times, circle the wagons, if you will, in times of stress and difficulty. And these are certainly these challenging times. But, again, I'll go back to my original comment that the talent that we have within the organization that reaches out and builds on those relationships, both internally and externally with our suppliers, I think that's a fundamental strength that we have. And, with both Maersk and Kuehne+Nagel, we've been longtime customers, and I think we have a very good working relationship. They've been very supportive of us, and we certainly would like to think that we've been very supportive of them, all in the end getting a product to our end consumer.
Great, Michael. Thank you for that. And Kim, I would bring you in on this question. Is there what is the thinking regarding collaboration and relationships? Obviously, as a traditional steamship line, you guys have seen your share of commodified relationships, transactional relationships, heads butting and at contract negotiations time. And probably a certain amount of that is going to continue going forward. But is this an opportunity to redefine relationships that we're in right now? And can you see a collaboration taking on a different meaning going forward?
Yes, certainly, Peter. And I think it has changed over the last years in the sense that the collaboration are becoming more based on what we just talked about the last almost an hour now, about visibility, about end-to-end knowledge. And it's the link to inventory is not about building a lot of inventory everywhere. It's to understand where your inventory is, and then you can plan accordingly, just like Stuart and Michael was saying. And there's an increased need for, when you are a partner to a customer that we have here on the call today, there is an increased need that these things are interconnected. Right now that you anyway are moving my business from Shanghai to Los Angeles, I would like to make sure that it's first off the ship and you can make ready through the terminal real quick and custom clear it and deliver it in wherever you want it. So that dialogue is happening already. And of course, our answer to that is that we would like to build much more integrated solutions and making sure that those operational handshakes are not a handshake of risk, but a handshake of visibility and a handshake of speed. And that's our answer to that. I would also like to mention in this relation that when we look at our customer interaction, the number of visits and calls we have with the clients, they have increased 40% in the last 9 months compared to the 9 months the year before. So in the name of collaboration, there is a lot of interaction going on in the discussion of how we can overcome the pain points of the supply chain with the customers. The Maersk app is being visited by 200,000 per week, which is 3 times as much as it was earlier this year. So I think, again, this situation around us causes for more collaboration, more visibility, and less protectionism and silo thinking.
Yep, understood, Kim. And certainly certainly we're heading, I think it's, put it this way, times of change, dramatic change over a short period of time sort of shocks the system into being able to rethink fundamental assumptions. And you guys, I think, we're already doing that just in the rolling out of your strategy over the past 2 years, roughly. So do you guys feel that you were sort of well prepared for this by having gotten started down the road of creating an integrated model, and then here you are, find yourself and find the industry at a very different place from where we thought we would be 6-8 months ago, or certainly at the beginning of 2020.
Yes, I think so. As you said, this is our answer to it. We certainly have taken time to think about what we believe is the right thing, not tomorrow, but in the next decades to come. And of course, that's then our strategic answer to that. You can say when we acquire a company of contract logistic activities in the US recently, we don't do that to be a better isolated warehouse operator than anyone else. We do that to integrate the international flows with the handshake that I just talked about, to make sure that that is seamless and that's a digital build on top of. So we think that's the answer to actually increase the value back to our customers much more than the handshakes or different parties that you have seen in the past.
Mm-hmm. And Kim, I just want to stick with you just for one moment, because I'm going to sort of segue a little bit into some of the audience questions here. And one of the questions is raised by a shipper who is saying that it's all well and good to talk about collaboration, to talk about creating value, but certainly shippers are still to this day experiencing the sort of gyration that we saw this year, where carriers withdrew very quickly significant amounts of capacity, then volumes built very, very quickly, and then all of a sudden the capacity really wasn't there to accommodate the volumes of demand, and rates went through the roof, and so obviously a very different behavioral pattern from carriers witnessed this year. How do you reconcile that experience this year with your desire to build new kinds of relationships with customers?
Yeah, it's an extraordinary year for all of us, right? And to the person who asked that question, I'm sure as a shipper you will know that as the asset owner, it's a very, very difficult task to balance the demand and the supply that has been evolving this way cross corridors in the world with the assets that we have on board. So we're doing our best despite those implications. But all in all, it's all based on the platform of collaboration with the client, talking to them about what do you need, what do you expect to need tomorrow. But in these days, many of our big clients have actually not been able to give us an answer. I mean, when does a country lock down? My factory in Mexico is shut down. I don't know when it's going to open again, but in the meantime, I'll have a lot of flows coming in and out of Europe to serve those markets. It's been this kind of shock, as you called it earlier, wave that we as a carrier has to combine based on 70,000 customers' behaviors into one answer to that. And that's been a super difficult exercise, which we still, of course, in the middle of. So that's the way we, of course, want to increase the collaboration, to increase the conversation with the clients, to understand what they need, and then try to build our capacity accordingly.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and obviously that's a conversation that's very much going to continue into next year, when sort of the more long-term impact of what happened this year is going to become sort of more manifest. A couple of questions have come in regarding sort of the subject that we started with in this webinar, that being sort of extended supply chains versus nearshoring. And I just want to make sure that I understand you guys all pretty clearly here in saying that you don't automatically see the sort of increased risk in the supply chain, the repeated shocks to the system, the disruption, as necessarily leading to nearshoring or more manufacturing being closer to end supply. You're not necessarily saying that from what I'm hearing you say. Is that a fair statement, Michael, John, and Stuart?
Yeah,
for me, yeah.
Yeah, from our side, for sure, it's, one thing we've got to remember is the cost to serve as well. Is the end consumer or the customer willing to pay for the cost differential of nearshoring or onshoring that production? So there's still a lot of economies of scale out there which can't be defeated unless the consumer is willing to pay more. So ultimately, I don't feel a significant shift, but we certainly might change some of the things we do from, a postponement or late adaptation of a product to local market, but otherwise not a major shift.
Same for me.
Understood.
Capability and capacity just isn't there, necessarily. It's depending on what the commodity is, it's you can't just switch off China, for example, and move somewhere else because capability and capacity doesn't exist elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Correct.
Yeah. And I think, Michael, you seem to be saying that essentially the same thing.
Yeah, very much so. It's always finding the right balance between the domestic nearshoring or offshoring. And I think part of the challenge that we've seen adding to the congestion woes through Vietnam, Malaysia that John touched on in the furniture piece in his previous comment is that when we sat down and looked at our planning and sat with our partners, as we do every year, one of the things that we recognized, partly because of the globalization shift, partly because of the tariffs that came into the U.S. in a couple waves through certain products coming out of China over the last 18 months or so, is we readily identified that we were shifting out of China into Southeast Asia. And we've done a pretty good job in doing that. But I don't see that, and I'd be interested to hear from John and Stuart, if you guys are seeing the same support from the carrier network supporting that volume shift as rapidly. Understand what, as Kim had said, with the multitude of customers and the multitude of variations and obstacles that are popping up, but we're still seeing a lot of congestion coming out of Malaysia, Vietnam, and the infrastructure, just the carrier base, isn't supporting the demand that we need.
Mm-hmm.
I'd agree with what you're saying there, Michael, entirely. Yeah.
Same, demand being so high, we just can't, it can't be supported with the demand at that level.
Well, this has been one of the big challenges as there has been diversification of sourcing in Asia. I mean, you saw China really unique in the world in getting out ahead of demand in infrastructure. So the ports were, built and expanded in anticipation of demand, not in response to demand. But you really haven't seen that in almost any other country, and that's the reason why, from our point of view, and talking to many shippers and carriers, and covering the developments in Southeast Asia, chronic congestion is really the norm. And so you have to expect that, given that the data is suggesting a continued diversification of sourcing, that's going to be a long-term story. So we only have a couple minutes left. I mean, so we were able to get to a couple questions. I'm sorry if we were not able to get to all of the questions, but thank you for those who submitted them. We really only have 2 minutes left. Paolo, is there any, very, very brief summation that you would say? And then I would ask the same of Kim, and then thank you all for joining us today.
I would say, first of all, thank you very much. Thanks for the attendees, and thanks for the panel. I think it was a good discussion. I believe that we all see the challenges. I think that we all understand we have great tools to face the challenges. One underlying topic, of course, is the fact that collaboration and responsiveness of companies working together is the only thing that really makes a difference. And when you have this well deployed, then of course your supply chain will be the winning supply chain. And so we only say that I think that I'm glad to see that this is across the board, more or less understood by everyone. That it's the challenge is let's work together closer in a less transactional way, because then we can build value, and value will by far outweigh anything else.
Terrific, Paolo. Thank you. And we're really right at time now. Kim, I want to just give you two seconds to give a final sign off here.
Thanks to everyone for attending. Thanks to John, Michael, and Stuart for sharing their information. I think it all boils down to we should try in the future to move away from managing all these complexities to eliminating all those complexities with digital solutions, proactive contingency planning, and the like. So I think we're on the right track. Thanks, Peter, for hosting a great session.
Terrific, Kim, and thank you all, gentlemen. It was really a pleasure to be with you here today. Really appreciate your forthright answers, and I would call everyone's attention to the third of the 3 Supply Chains Reloaded webinars, which is going to take place on Wednesday, November 4th, which is Increasing Resilience Through Sustainability, where we're going to talk on the whole sustainability question, which we really got to only briefly today. So thank you all for joining us, and thank you to all of our speakers today. Really appreciate it.
Right.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks to all.
Have a great day, everybody.
Okay.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Ja, ja, it's like a